Welcome back to Everyday Economics, the podcast that helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug, CEO of the 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics, a production of America's Talking Network. You can subscribe to all of our podcasts at americastalking.com. To support Everyday Economics, make a tax-deductible contribution by clicking the link in the show description. We are recording today's episode on Monday, April 8th. And joining me as always, Dr. Orphe Divounguy, PhD economist and all-around good guy. Dr. O, I want to talk to you about, well, I think we should talk about the jobs report. The most recent jobs report came out for March, and it indicates that 303,000 people were added to payrolls in the month. I have, just noted, not to be a drag on a headline, or to try to bring, some sort of like consideration or context to the way that the jobs report is reported. But a job is 1 hour of work in a given position in the previous month, right? And when we looked at the jobs report itself, the number is 303,000. I'm going to let you riff on this. Let's hear it.
Yeah, totally. Look, jobs report, employment grew by 303,000 in March, way above expectations, right? I think everyone expects employment growth to continue to slow. We started last year, we saw a big slowdown. I shouldn't say big slowdown because it's been kind of a slow slowdown. It's been very, very light every month, but at least the general trend has been a slowdown, right? And now all of a sudden at the start of this year, we're seeing some big jobs numbers, right? Some big job gains in January and February. We even had an upward revision of 22,000 jobs for January and February combined. So yes, quarter one's been a gangbuster quarter for employment growth, and economic growth is going to show up in the GDP numbers for sure. The industries that added the most jobs remain healthcare at 72,000 jobs, the government sector, especially local governments, with total government jobs 71,000 in the last month. Construction, 39,000 jobs. And of course, leisure and hospitality at 49,000 jobs added this past month. Remember, all of these sectors were sectors that were plagued by major labor shortages during the pandemic. They're sectors that saw big job losses and that didn't see jobs come back rapidly like other sectors. And they're seeing those jobs come back now. I mean, maybe they're up a little bit now, finally. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the unemployment rate that was 3.9% last month actually fell slightly to 3.8% this month. It's, the Bureau of Labor Statistics says the unemployment rate remained the same. Yes, it's a very small decrease. But the point is the labor market remains very, very tight. Okay. Now, here's the good news. The good news, by the way, that was good news. I shouldn't say here's the good news because that was good news. Americans are working. That's good news. I think we need to embrace that. It's great that people are finding work and that they're able to work. Now, for the Fed, the good news for the Fed that has been really, really tracking whether or not this strong labor market, this very tight labor market could turn out to be inflationary, right? The good news here is that hourly wages were up 4.3% year over year in February. They're up 4.1%, down from 4.3% year over year last month. And so that is great news because what this is showing is that the employment increase is really due to the supply side. The easing coming from an increase in the labor force, from people coming into the U.S. labor market and filling those jobs that nobody was filling or wanting to do before, right? It's causing wage growth to ease, and that's helping us. That's helping us curb the pressure that was there before. Remember, wage growth is a symptom of higher productivity growth or higher inflation. And so if we're seeing wage growth ease, we're basically seeing non-inflationary growth in the U.S. economy, and that's a good thing. So this jobs report last week was just good news all around for everyone. And so the markets are going to celebrate that. The problem, of course, is that, will the recent productivity surge that we've seen, will that be sustained? Will the increase in the size of the labor force, number of available workers be sustained? Those are big question marks. And so, and that's what the Fed is now paying attention to.
All right. So here I go. I'm going to try to put a pin in that balloon. So the Associated Press, in their report, they say that healthcare and private education, leisure and hospitality, and government accounted for nearly 69% of the hiring in March. And when you go into the actual jobs report, in March, employment in government increased by 71,000, higher than the average monthly gain of 54,000 per month over the previous 12 months. Over the month, employment increased in local government by 49,000 and federal government by 9,000. So, yeah, I mean, there are jobs there, but I mean, these are jobs that the people who are listening to us are paying for. And yes, so these people are employed, but these are taxpayer funded jobs.
Look, Chris, I'm not going to completely disagree with you here, but I will also somewhat disagree with you. There are two types of government jobs. I've written in the past about this, Look, there are investments in government spending, right? Investments that come from the government that actually yields positive income gains to the U.S. economy as a whole. While there are also jobs that are basically, not jobs, but government spending, allocations of resources that are wasteful. And so I don't want to kind of put all of that in the same bucket, right? And I want to say, look, government spending should be carefully scrutinized because some expenditures yield gains in productivity, gains in economic growth, in future economic growth. And some spending is completely wasteful, which is why the job of government, the job of putting together these government budgets should be a careful one. The latest increase in government spending, if you want to just kind of take the big numbers and the aggregate, the latest increase in government spending, the types of budgets that we're talking about in Washington, D.C. today could turn out to be somewhat inflationary, right? When you have constraints on the supply side, you cannot continue to boost the demand side like government spending has in recent years. Now, especially discretionary spending, right? At the same time, discretionary spending is probably not where we're going to make the biggest dent either. We know that it's entitlement reform that's desperately needed in this country, right? And so again, while I agree that some of it might turn out to be wasteful and, push inflation and yields higher, ultimately hurting the same American people that are supposed to benefit from it, I would also caution that some government spending could actually benefit the U.S. economy. You just have to look at our degrading infrastructure that's fallen apart everywhere. You just have to travel a little bit and get outside the country and see what other countries have been able to do with their infrastructure and compare it to what kind of infrastructure we have in this country to realize basically that we've fallen behind on some levels. And so I think that would be the point here. So not all jobs are wasted or wasteful. And yeah, the 71,000 jobs definitely are supporting those jobs numbers somewhat. I would also argue that maybe we should compare to what things were like before the pandemic, right? Is the total number of government jobs today higher than it was before the pandemic? I think that number, you might be surprised to find out that it's actually just caught up to where it was before the pandemic. And so maybe this is not completely in abnormal territory yet. But if it continues in that direction, yes, it could become a major issue. I mean, it is to some extent already when you look at the dollars, like I mentioned, right? Because we're in a period where supply, keeping the supply gains that we've had could prove elusive, right? Will we get the productivity surge to continue? Will we get the supply surge in terms of the labor, the number of workers to continue to absorb all of that demand? That remains a big question mark. And so, yes, I am going to be the fair and balanced view here today on the podcast and say, yes, problematic, perhaps if it continues at this pace, but potentially, some of that could be beneficial and some of that could be wasteful. We don't know quite yet, and we're going to find out eventually. I can tell you one thing, though. I could conclude with this, though, is that 6% of GDP, a deficit of 6% at 6% of GDP in normal times, when we're not in a recession, is scary. According to CBO projections, this number could go up to 8.5 and maybe even 9, close to 9% of GDP in the future. And so I think we need to definitely do something about our government spending in this country. We need to curb it so that we don't end up seeing the type of inflation pressure that we saw in 2021, in 2022. And basically, you look at the inflation numbers, right? The Fed is struggling, right, to keep inflation, to bring inflation down to 2%. The Fed funds rate has been high for a very long time now and could remain this high, causing unnecessary pain to a lot of families if the federal government doesn't get in line, right? And continues to kind of what I call fight the Fed, essentially, by spending so much and basically stimulating the U.S. economy at a time where we should be trying to slow things down a little bit to bring inflation under control.
All right, thanks. I appreciate it. For Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics and dozens of other high-quality podcasts at americastalking.com.
Knowledge is power, and you deserve to know what happens in your state government. That's why the Center Square's reporting zeroes in on state authorities publishing stories that show where your money goes and who spends it. The Center Square gives power to the taxpayer by tracking politicians' use of the people's money and demanding transparency from state-run agencies. This is how the Center Square equips you, the American taxpayer, to hold your state government accountable. Sign up now for your state's Center Square newsletter at thecentersquare.com.